Here we are again. Thank you very much. Welcome to the Languages Pedagogy Podcast. Today, I have another amazing guest. This has been an amazing season. I've actually had wonderful teachers, and today is not different from the other ones. We have a wonderful guest this time, a wonderful teacher, Jose. Here we are with you, Jose Torres. Welcome to this little corner. I was actually one of your guests, and now you're my guest now. It's
Yes,
been
yes,
amazing. Please introduce yourself. Let us know who you are, what you do.
sure. So at the end of the day, Mike, I am an ELD teacher. That is my profession. That is my obsession, actually. Well, but I do a lot of different things. I'm also a podcaster like you. I have two YouTube channels that are based. They focus basically on multilingual learning. One is geared more towards the textbooks that I've written. I want to
Mhm.
learn English and writing journey for beginners, and I'm expanding now. I'm doing online classes. I've been inspired by you actually to do online classes, so I'm doing that now. Um, but in my own show, I want to teach English. I get to talk to guests who are, big thinkers in our field, and I've been fortunate enough to have interviewed some really big minds so far, and I'm only getting better. There's more people. I won't say who yet because you know how it is, Mike. You don't want to jinx it, but
Exactly.
it's getting bigger now, where I'm getting bigger guests, and that's really exciting.
Well, I'm really happy actually to have you here. You're one of the biggest guests that I have also here. It's really actually good to have people like pretty knowledgeable people actually to
Mhm.
share knowledge, to share what they know, what they've been actually able to learn throughout these years in education. And
Sure.
you're one of them. So today we're gonna just start with this topic, and before actually just doing this podcast, I was actually thinking about this one because this is the one of the topics that I have for this season. And I was like, the ethics of language teaching, power, access, and responsibility. And I was like,
Hmm.
hmm, this one. Hold on a second. I know someone. I know someone really good at this one because I also follow you because I actually follow podcasts as well of of other teachers and I follow yours. And I actually was checking on one of the episodes that you have about men, why men are not actually joining the educational system, or why not so many men actually as a teacher right now,
Hmm.
working as teachers right now, and mostly women, and why is that? I like that episode, but I
Yeah.
remember you actually had another one. I forgot the name of your guest, but you were actually talking about a little bit about these issues as well, the ethics of language teaching.
Yeah, I was actually talking to Dr. Deborah Suarez. She's the past
Mhm.
president of TESOL International. We talked a bit about that. I might have discussed this with, maybe a couple other guests. I can't think off the top of my mind, off the top of my head, really. But, I'm glad you bring up the notion of ethics and how that correlates or how that connects to men, because men have a different way of thinking.
Mhm.
It's not better or anything like that. It's just different than the way women think. And I think that's been documented in many studies. But I don't want to get into the weeds of that, Mike. I think ethics in general applies to all genders and all people, right?
Exactly.
And,
True.
and let me and let me really get to the heart of that, which is ethics in its purest form is not neutral. Okay, teaching it isn't neutral. Okay, so whether we want to name it as one particular thing, the instruction really rests on something deep, philosophically speaking, and there are assumptions made in that philosophical level, right? So I'm gonna get real technical here about some things in terms of philosophy, right? It has to do with human agency, right? Agency is a really big thing.
Agency.
Agency is a big term that people use. They throw it around loosely, but I don't think people really understand what it means, especially when you're talking about ethics and teaching. Time and really value the worth of people. And with multilingual learners, especially the newcomers, these assumptions. There are a lot of assumptions that come as soon as they walk through the door. So if you allow me to indulge you,
Yes, go
there
ahead.
there 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 are three really propositions uh,
Ooh.
that I want to focus on when we're dealing with ethics and teaching. Okay, the first one is the freedom of will. Okay, And this is agency versus conditioning. And this is a big one, especially in public schools, because you hear this a lot. And I don't know how it is in Europe or in other countries, but in America, it's really, really profound. So basically, where educators go wrong here is treating learners as products of circumstance. When you treat students as products of circumstance, they're not coming in with their own mindset or their own set of rules or their own belief system. They're coming in as, whatever that is that brought them here, we're going to reconfigure that, which is
Understand that. Yeah.
ethically speaking, that is a big, big no-no. You're also, I think a lot of times we get it wrong that we assume trauma, we assume poverty, we assume that they have interrupted schooling, and that determines their capacity. I think
That's
there's a
another one.
lot of
Yeah.
that.
Yes.
And also designing the instruction around what students can't do as opposed to what they choose to work for. All right. And I'm going to get into this, and there's other questions down the road. So believe me, I will elaborate on what I'm really talking about in terms of designing instruction for what they can do or what they can't do. Right.
That's
And
you actually you're right now touching exactly the point, I
yeah.
mean, that's it. We can actually just summarize the whole point right
Right,
now.
and I really want to dive into it, but believe me, I'm going to dive into it a little later in one of the other questions we got. So that's the first part of the first proposition. Okay,
Yeah.
so and then there's this misstep that we make, I think, generally speaking, as instructors, as teachers, is that compassion becomes soft determinism, right? Soft determinism meaning our compassion for our students is putting them in a box, putting them in an academic box, and that really that you have a situation where students are spoken for,
Yeah.
rather than expected to act through their language, and this is really, I think the whole idea
That was very
of
deep there. That was very
yeah,
deep there.
yeah.
I really like that one.
There's this big, and there's people that talk of bigger minds than me that like to talk about that, that there are teachers that look at language, speaking another language as a deficit when in fact it is an asset. So you hear that a lot, these coin phrases about them being assets.
Yes.
And I really think that that's kind of a backpedaling of the soft determinism, if you will. So here's the ethical stance, if you will.
Yeah,
That
well, the ethical that's a really good one. I really like that the one that you said. I would like to actually quote it because before actually just bringing the episode, I will just make these quotes. It's like Jose Torres said
yeah,
it. Amazing. I
yeah.
love that one.
So really, ethical teaching, Mike, it assumes learners can choose. It assumes that they can strive, that they can revise, and that they
Yeah.
can grow. All right. And this is the agency part of it, because when you're teaching and you're like, I'm not going to try to shape your way of thinking. I'm going to present ideas to you and you make sense of, excuse me, you make sense of it how you can with the tools that you have in your mind to synthesize that so that their brains are actually working as opposed to just feeding them something. Okay, well, this is how it is and blah, blah, blah. I think there's a lot of that happens. So language instruction should restore agency, right? Not replace it with scaffolds forever,
Oh, yeah.
which is I think one of the big issues that we have in teach, especially multilingual learners, because the compassion aspect of it is it takes precedence over the ethical, I think the ethical responsibility that we have as
So
teachers.
there it comes a little bit of the inequity, right?
Yep. And I don't think that people do it deliberately in a malice. They do it
Definitely.
because it's almost like nature to them that they think they're doing it the right way. And that's a big misconception. So that's the first proposition. That's only the first one in dealing with
Ooh,
the freedom of will. Okay.
yeah.
Now we're going to the second proposition. Okay. And that's the immortality of the soul. Okay. The long-term consequences versus the short-term utility. This is the
This is
other
very philosophical.
ethical. Yes, we're going into a philosophy area here. Okay. But we don't need to argue the metaphysics or anything like that. We just have to translate it into two things, which is time and consequence, right?
Exactly.
So here's what educators need to avoid. Okay, they need to avoid asking what happens to students. I keep messing up my
Your
thing here,
headphones
so
there.
forgive me. My headphone.
It's
Uh,
okay.
we keep asking what happens to students after the program, right? The test and the funding cycle. Um, and we're really teaching for immediate results. Okay.
Ooh, yeah,
We're teaching
yeah.
for immediate results. And I get that because a lot of teachers are are under the gun. You know,
Yeah,
we gotta
under
increase our
pressure. Yeah,
data.
exactly.
You know, our students have to go from proficiency level 1.2 to 1.7, and we have to do it like now.
Yeah.
So there's a real ethical conundrum here, and that has to do with it has to do with fluency, right? Now, how one speak. The fluency is prioritized over
Yeah.
literacy, and
Yes.
this has dire consequences when you place fluency, verbal fluency over literacy, because it's faster, right? You can, and it really boils down. It comes down to the whole survival English, the survival language,
Survival language.
right? And that's easier to measure actually. You can measure how someone speaks, and you especially with like the smaller kids with dibbles, you're listening to and you're
Yeah.
writing down what they get right, in terms of what they're able to articulate. So students can kind of skirt by with this idea of sounding competent as opposed to being able to read. And when you get to the adults, and it's really, really troublesome because they have to read
We're facing
contracts.
actually
They
the
have
problems. Yeah.
Yes, well, they have to read forms. They have to read documents, and so literacy is more important, I think, the older you get.
Influence. Yes.
But if you don't establish that earlier on, you're gonna have a lot of problems. I have a brother who's illiterate, and he's in his 70s now. It's way, and he's obviously
Whoa.
didn't want to do it anymore. But like, we've had to. I remember coming home from school and like he had me a letter. Could you read me this letter? Because he couldn't read, and
Wow.
that's very sad. So
Well,
here's the ethical.
that's a really nice part actually that you said right now over there because everything starts from a kindergarten, from the little ones, from they actually
Yep.
just starting to, if you don't actually just make them love actually a little bit of the literacy there, how to teach that part, that very important part. And then as they grow up, they just turn to, I don't know, adults and they cannot actually read properly. Why?
Yeah,
Because they were actually taught just to focus on one thing, but the other one just left behind.
yeah. I mean,
Unethical, we
there's a
would
lot of
say.
cases like that, and I think
Yeah,
that's probably one of the more dramatic problems that we face,
yeah.
as a society in general. All right, so literacy, we can assume, well, we're literacy, we can agree that it's a moral obligation. We have
Yes.
to teach our kids this for a number of reasons. It doesn't necessarily have to be because we want to assert the idea of college or academia at a higher level, because even
But here's the thing.
survival
You said something
English.
really good. I'm sorry, I actually just
No,
cutting
go
you
ahead,
right
go
now.
ahead, go
But
ahead.
the thing is that you said something very important about literacy. It must be done actually. But what's going on right now? What's the reality right now in America? Is that a reality? I mean, it's part of the curriculum, let's say, something like it. Is it changing? Is it actually giving a change, or is it actually
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
it?
Well, I think the mindset is that they want to do it, and they certainly pour a lot of money into
The
it
mindset,
for
the
this.
mindset you mean
For the
referring to
the
teachers?
I'm referring to the system, and I think there's a question later, a
Mhm.
little bit later, when we talk about the system, and I go
Mhm.
into what the system is doing, and I think the question, I don't want to I don't want to foreshadow too much, but
Yeah.
I think the system. I think you were alluding to who has more of the power. Is it the system, the education? Is it the curriculum designers? Is it the teachers? And on down the line. And so I want to elaborate on that a little bit more, if you if you let
Yeah.
me elaborate a little bit later, and I'll just kind of table this part of this
Go
second
ahead.
point that I'm making about immorality, if you will.
Yeah.
So here's where I'm gonna close out with immorality of the soul, okay? And that's the long-term consequences and the short-term utility, because I think we're boxed in that we need to show results and we need to show them now. So I think a lot of times the question is asked as, can they speak now? Can they speak right now, today? And what will this language allow them to do years from now? And I think for adult learners, it's more consequential for the short term. But when you're dealing with K through 12, I think we have a little bit more I think we can invest a little bit more in the literacy part, especially in the younger years for kids. And I could talk to that a little bit later as well. But I want to get to the third proposition, and it's the most crucial, but probably the one that people are going to cringe at the most,
Ooh.
especially since we work in a secular system, and that is the existence of God. Okay. The
Ooh.
inherent worth versus the instrumental value. Now, I'm going to elaborate on what I mean by this. Okay. So here's where educators get things wrong in terms of ethics, because when you're talking about ethics, it needs to be grounded in something, right? I'm not, you don't preach to this. You're not going to get up there, Bible in hand or anything like that. You're just translating what is
Exactly.
going on. Okay. So here's what teachers get wrong is that valuing learners, okay, primarily for economic integration. Okay. You're looking at learners as a product down the road to become workers, to become servants of society in some capacity, to be cogs in the machine of social order. Okay. And that is a very secular view. Okay. So when you're talking about ethics, okay, it's it's segregated to just within that domain of it can only be within the bounds of what is secular, right? But here's the issue. Okay, language language is a workforce preparation instead of human formation. Okay, the human experience is beyond being a worker. Being a human being is more than just being somebody on the assembly line in a factory, or an Uber driver, or a pizza maker.
Any professor, yeah.
The human experience is more than being an employee, and yet this is how we approach the ethics of how we're teaching, right? So curriculum designed for labor and the labor market and the usefulness of that, rather than the dignity. And I want to get into the part about dignity, because dignity is rooted somewhere else. It's not rooted in a secular mindset. As much as the politicians and the ideologues want to believe that it really is not. When you reduce students to outputs, when you reduce them to data, when you reduce them to metrics, and that is your success story, like, really? That's a success of a student, is they can make your data points look better. I mean, come on. That's not human experience at all. That is
First of
not
all,
experiencing that's not experiencing the world at all. So learners, they possess intrinsic worth, right? We all want to be looked at as more than just a number, and not just some kind of instrument for something else. Just because I'm a teacher, just because I work in a school, just because I'm bound by the obligations of ensuring that my students produce better data points, doesn't eliminate the fact that I care about my students. You know what I mean? It doesn't eliminate the human factor that I
exactly.
see these little kids growing up and having families of their own and that sort of thing. And that bringing me a certain sense of joy that I can be part of that journey for them. That's a human connection. That isn't a data point. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So,
you got a point there.
so, and really, if you look at the world that way, if you approach teaching that way, then depending on where you're, look, there's a lot of different denominations of Christianity. Okay, it
Yeah,
doesn't matter what your ideology is anymore. You could be LGBT, you could be this, you could be that, and you will find a church that accepts you. So
yeah.
you can still have a connection to God. you know and there are people that are more strict about it, more stringent. Like,
Regardless of the religion or whatever.
I'm
Yeah.
Catholic, so I'm bound by a different way of thinking of Catholicism. But there are other denominations that look at Christianity in a different way. And
Mhm.
so you can still have that connection with God and still have that human element and connection with your students, because that's where the dignity part comes in. Think about this, Mike. If you reduce your students to merely how well they do on tests and their data scores, okay, their data points, if you will, how is that remotely dignity?
Exactly.
How is that remotely dignified? There is no dignity there. If you reduce a child to say, okay, well, you can read X amount of words in a minute or 2 minutes or whatever the criteria is, really?
You
Really?
just log
That's
them
the
in. You
worth?
just log them in. Yeah.
Yeah. and like that's there's no dignity there. You
Hmm.
know, there's really just you're putting them in like this factory mindset. And so I think that's where we get those are the three things that I think we get wrong in the terms of ethics
Yeah,
of teachers because we treat language as merely a tool for productivity, you know, and instead of risking the teaching officially while you know there's the whole human element that is in play. Those variables have to come those variables of the human side have to come into play for the role of dignity to actually happen. And I think
that's true.
if you eliminate that and you purely look at it from a secular mindset, I don't see how you can possibly understand the dignification. I really don't. That's just me.
No, you just actually said it completely there. But the thing is that here's the thing. I mean, in this world, in this system where actually everything needs to be measured, everything is measurable, everything needs to have a score. How we can just actually work in that sense? Because we're actually
Yeah.
going into different ways. It sounds really beautiful in words. I mean, we gotta actually know about what ethic is and how we can actually dignify students, people. I mean, learning a second language, third, fourth language. But we need to actually have that other part. So how can we actually just balance it?
Well, it comes down to the individual teacher. I think, you know, if I could just leap over to that one question about who holds the power, I think there's a certain degree of power that is held by the instructor, by the teacher, because the teacher at the end of the day can navigate what is permissible and what isn't. And there's a lot of gray area where they can implement certain parts of the lesson to connect to other areas of human dignity that isn't bound by whatever the curriculum inside this little box says, right?
Yeah.
And so teachers have to have that flexibility. You could take something even
Do we have that
I think
flexibility? I'm sorry.
do we have that flexibility?
Yeah. Do
I
we
think we
have it?
do. We do, but there's a lot of teachers who don't want to veer off from what their superiors or supervisors or their
So
principals
then
or
there's no
whoever.
flexibility then. So there we
In
call
some cases,
there comes again the dignifying someone. So we gotta dignify also the teacher, right? So
well,
if
yeah, you
we
have
gotta
to. I think it's a case by case basis, Mike, because there are some teachers who are too scared to go beyond what
wow.
their you know
That's a tough
their
word, being
supervisor is
scared.
telling them to do. They're scared to go outside of that because they don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to get yelled at. They don't want to be reprimanded. They don't, and so and systems I think hold teachers down this way. But you know, you have crafty teachers, some
So
people who have
the
been doing
ethical.
this a long time, like me,
Mhm.
who I've been doing this a long time. Good luck trying to pin me down that way. That's just because I, you
But
know,
that's one
I
of the
think
problems. You
you
know, we're
learn how to
talking
do.
about ethical. We're talking about ethical, but what is ethical for students right now? But now we're actually jumping a little bit that fence and just crossing to this other part. What's ethical for the teachers as well? Then if you're
Yeah,
actually using the word scare, teachers
yeah,
scared of just doing something that it's actually pro students,
yeah.
it's actually
I,
big that thing.
I don't think I'm going out on a limb here saying that. I think if you ask enough teachers, if you ask them covertly, they'll be, they're honest about it. They'll
Mhm.
tell you, like it's in some circumstance, some situations, some schools, you know, you have very tyrannical, you know, administrators. That's just a
Yeah.
fact. Anybody who thinks otherwise is living in a dream because I've been subjected to it, you know. And
True.
in one school, I had a principal who was vehemently trying to get me in trouble and trying to find me in anything just to write me up because she hated me that much. Because I pushed back on something, because I talked and I advocated for my students, because I said, no, I'm not doing this because this goes against whatever, you know, where no,
Exactly.
that's not what the contract says I'm supposed to do.
It's
And
not
so
about
because I
what you
pushed
want, it's what we want
yeah,
you to do.
yeah.
Period.
And I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. And I called in my union rep and whatever it is, and it just became a mess because now then after that she wanted to get me in trouble. And so and there are teachers who that kind of stress level is too much for them to handle.
That's one of the things that I can actually just compare. And in one of the episodes that in the episode that you invited me in, I remember we were talking about this type of thing, comparing a little bit of the cultures and all that. And I can see that what happens, what you're telling me, is your perspective from the place where you are. but there is not so far away from the place where I am right now as well. Because the same situation happens here. I mean, teachers are all scared. Yeah,
Yeah.
they actually call them leaders. I mean, the leader, no, the leader said you got to actually jump out from the third floor. You got to do it because that means you're doing it right. I mean,
Well, if
where are the ethics? No ethics here in
Mike,
education. It's only just for the ones that actually are they're benefiting or they're actually serving for themselves, but not for the educational system, not for the teachers or students, I guess.
well, I mean, they're just in the same way that teachers have to figure out the middle ground between what they ethically believe is right and what they are obligated to do by contract. Sometimes you have to balance these two worlds out. They contradict each other, and they're very different. Sometimes they contrast each other in a lot of ways. I think when we navigate through life itself, even if you're a religious person like I am, I'm
Yeah.
constantly at odds with what, these two worlds are, what my religion tells me I should be doing and what I do, in the world is, I curse, I behave bad sometimes. And it's really just trying to navigate the world as best you can without hurting anyone. I think is
Yeah.
the key, right?
It's like walking on
Uh,
eggshell.
well, I weigh too much. I'll break every egg I step on. So,
Yeah.
um, anyway, shall we move on?
Yeah. I think like access, well, this is one of the questions that I was actually thinking also. Access is a popular buzzword, but access to what truly matters for newcomers, curriculum, literacy, dignity, opportunity, or agency.
All right. So, access is a very vague term. Access to curriculum. It's not just, classroom. Access to literacy, right? Which is, you could say that, but like, it's a lot of work involved.
Yeah.
There's the access to time, which is really the rarest resource for adult learners. The access to dignity, which I've already elaborated on. It's not pity. It's really allowing people to be who they are. It's the access to agency, I think, that is probably the most that it means. I think they're trying to say the access to agency, which is not some kind of scripted participation, if you will. But on if you were to put a bullet if you were to put a gun to someone's head who uses this word, they'll probably
Yeah.
say they mean access to opportunity. I think that's what they're referring to. They may
Mhm.
look at it from an equity lens or something like that. And depending on where you live, I think there may be some truth to that. But honestly, it's really a matter of access to agency is what it really truly matters for newcomers. Because if a newcomer, if somebody who's new to the country, uh, is swept by this current, right?
Yeah.
And I see this a lot in public schools, where they want to fit in so bad that they'll listen to whatever the teachers and whatever the other students are doing, and they'll just follow along, and they just become part of this whatever
System.
monstrosity that they're pushing.
Yes,
And it's like, and
exactly.
there's like, it's not them. It's this, they just, their need to belong. And so, it's, I think for multilingual learners, I think it's crucial for them to have access to their agency. And it's probably the one thing that they find most elusive when they walk into a public school.